you're good to go.
All right, great. Thanks, Cindy. Okay, Council, I'd like to call this regular Council meeting of June 8th, 2020 to order, asking for an adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Charlotte, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to adoption of the minutes of the May 11th, 2021 meeting. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Charlotte, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from those minutes? Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Just regarding 606 Victoria, I think that was left hanging, and I'm just wondering if any other councillors had any comments, because there's still outstanding issues there and a number of further correspondence to council. I don't think it's on the agenda, but I'm just wondering where other councillors are regarding 606, because I think it was left largely unresolved.
I think Mr. Simon was working with the proponent and trying to get some resolution to some of the noise. Mr. Simon, if you're on, do you have any comment about where we're at this point?
To your worship and all of council, staff have been continually working with the proponent and have completed site inspections to address and resolve some of the matters that have been raised, specifically with respect to the noise. And there has been additional noise attenuation measures that have been installed on the site, and staff will continue to work with the proponent to address the community concerns.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Palmer, go ahead.
Yeah, so, and again, specifically, I'm just wondering if there's any concerns from any other councillors. I do have a comment, but I'm just wondering where any other councillors are on this issue. Or if there's even...
Councillor Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I have concerns as well. I noticed, I mean, we talked about this at our last meeting, but there's some daycares nearby and obviously people are being disrupted. So I'm curious, like, what our options are. It doesn't sound like there's much we can do other than work with the proponent to mitigate any kind of noise. But does any other councillors have any suggestions?
Councillor Elliott.
I guess there was also some encroachment on the road, whether the fencing was right or whether it was adequate. I know they made some improvements, but I'm not sure whether that, I think sent a letter recently that it's not on the agenda here, but I'm wondering whether that's been addressed as well.
Any further comments from any other councillors? Councillor Palmer and then Councillor Brooks Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I'll let Councillor Brooks Hill go ahead.
Councillor Brooks Hill.
Yeah, I still have concerns about this project. It's obviously upset the neighborhood, and there's been a number of correspondence, sort of, I guess, bringing up the point that there's quite a few areas where they don't seem to be in compliance with the fencing, questioning whether the building is higher than it's supposed to be. And I just feel like everything about that project seems to be raising a lot of concerns, and it's hard as a councillor to balance what we're hearing from the public, whereas we're not staff, we're not the ones who are meant to be addressing these potential bylaw infractions, or I don't know what the term is, but things that are going against what their development permit or building permit are. And I get letters from people saying that they're not following all of these different rules, and I haven't gone out there with a measuring tape. I don't know where the survey stakes are. It's really hard for me. But at the same time, I appreciate that the neighbors are obviously upset. And I'm not 100% sure what the best course of action as a council is. And that's kind of my comment, that I'm left a little bit confused.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Palmer, I'll go back to you.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Yeah, I think. Well, I'm definitely troubled about the whole thing, and it's beyond just the neighborhood. I think there's some definitely we need to be looking deeper into. Okay, what went wrong here? What's because this isn't just, this has to do with our OCP questions around our zoning. We have a building there that's using a porta potty as theoretically for this temporary building that's going to be there for years. There's questions around the fencing. There's still infractions on the parking, the development permit, the landscaping thing still isn't addressed, and yet they're full speed ahead. We don't know whether they have occupancy or what that looks like, and the inspections, the environmental concerns. I do have a suggestion, just sort of based on the confusion. I'll put it as a motion that a council committee be formed to task to review the development application at 606 Victoria and report back to council with their findings and recommendations, and that this committee be comprised of the interim CAO. I haven't talked to the interim CAO on this, but with the interim CAO and 2 councillors. That'd be a motion that I'd be putting on the table there. I'm certainly open to massaging it, but I think we can't just leave this without diving a little bit deeper and saying, okay, what did we do wrong as a council? What's the problem here? Do we need to look at changing the delegation bylaw? And there's a whole host of things. Anyway, that's a motion on the table. There's some massaging on that. I'm open to that. Or if there's a seconder.
Okay, before I ask for a seconder, I'm going to ask Mr. Matusi if he has any comment at this point.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, it's a difficult issue because often when you have a use like this that is creating problems, you have to, quickly sort out, the problems that are fixable and the problems that are, you really can't. If you're in an industrial area, there's sometimes noise. So that does happen in light industrial areas. So, I think by going through and looking at it in detail and sorting out, that piece that's fixable and that piece isn't, I think it'll be helpful. I mean, I'm more than pleased to work with council on this. I've had a very superficial view of the item. And I've dealt with the fire chief, for instance, in the letter where a number of complaints went through and he inspected. But to be able to go through and sort each piece by piece, certainly would be helpful. There's really, in many of these cases, often there's not much you could do if the zoning's appropriate zoning, if the development permit was issued and maybe the original zoning was wrong. It's very difficult to then step in and say we're not issuing an issuable development permit, right? So maybe going back and just looking at all that, would be helpful. But I do caution council that sometimes in these cases, building permits, where someone builds something they don't like or the community doesn't like, but the permit is issuable, that you have to actually give it. Is in a very difficult position because often it's not really resolvable. But to take the time to go back and look at the issues around zoning, because that's where it obviously starts, and then looking if, again, what parts are correctable. I'm certainly be more than happy if that's council's wish.
All right, thank you for that. So in light of that, is there a seconder for Councillor Palmer's motion? Councillor Brooks-Hill. I will ask the question and then we will talk about councillors who want to sit on this. Councillor Charlotte, you have a question before we ask that.
I do. I'm concerned about whether council is the best people for that discussion or if a third party that's not political would be better. And just a question.
Okay. Any comment, Mr. Matusi, on that?
Your worship, again, in this particular case, certainly, my view is pretty independent. I really don't have a lot of history on this other than the emails that I've been getting lately. I'm not sure if that would be any more helpful to be bringing in a group. But one of the benefits of having a council group is at least then at least your peers are reviewing it and could. As my guess is you're going to see some things are, go back to zoning. Some things are right. Some things can be fixed. Some things can't. Then at least it's your peers reporting back. If you had independent, now the question is, what does independent look like? And is it an independent group that because at the end of the day, I think council has to be satisfied. You have to satisfy yourself. And so it's really about what will make you comfortable with that. Picking 3 people at random from the community is a bit like jury duty. Some people may agree with who gets picked and somebody who doesn't. At least you've all been elected. So
right. No, and fair enough. And honestly, I was satisfied at the last meeting when we discussed the issues that arose in this process and where we need to improve our zoning, improve our rules and our bylaws and policies. And I firmly believe and feel confident that work is in progress and is in fact part of our conversation on Thursday at Committee of the Whole, from what I can see, when we're talking about getting into the zoning and bylaw, zoning and building bylaws and where that fits. That being said, I know my fellow councillors have quite a few concerns, as does the community, and if this would help clarify that so we can move forward and get this important work done, then so be it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rund.
Yeah, I think I'm less interested in figuring out. Well, I guess we have to figure out, the little details of what happened, but I'm less interested in that because it's very clear, I think, to all of us that, the existing bylaws are what staff was following when they approved this permit. But if there are parts of that we need to improve, as Councillor Charlotte was just mentioning, that we can sort of expedite or prioritize. Maybe it's like a noise bylaw or whatever these kind of things are that could improve the situation for the neighborhood right now or in the near future once those get changed or improved or put in place if they don't exist. I think that would be interesting to me. So I don't know if that's your intent, Councillor Palmer, but if that's the case, then I'm in full support. Yeah.
Councillor Palmer, comment?
Yeah, I think it's to do that high level review of, okay, what's gone wrong? What are the, what's gone wrong? But also so for example, looking at it, was there infractions of bylaws potentially? Again, we're not the ones that ultimately decide that, but looking at things, for example, the development permit was based on a storage building. Well, we don't have a storage building. So is that an issue that should be looked into a little bit more? The questions of light versus medium industrial. I think there's an indication that we need to improve our definitions. However, that be just something that comes out of that. Is there other things that can be addressed? And if not, then what do we do to mitigate this in the future? So I think it encompasses all that. At a high level, I don't see us diving down into, nitty-gritty of decibels and things like that, but just looking at the broad view. And I think with 2 councillors and our interim CAO with a good planning experience, then we can come with some possible recommendations back to council.
Okay, thank you for that. So if this is the intention of this little group, is to look for solutions and realize that there may not be much that can be done, then I'm supportive of that. If this is looking for other than that, looking for just problems, then I'm not in support of that. So, Councillor Palmer, I'm going to point blank ask, your intention, my understanding, is to look for solutions. Is that correct?
Mayor Sulz, I would hope that council is always looking for solutions. However, solutions come when we identify that there are problems. And at the very minimum, there's some problem here because it's blown up. I think there's distress, and so trying to find out what those things are. So I can't say that it's not saying, okay, well, there is a problem here. So, for example, we talked about last time on the delegation bylaw that there's the $100,000 threshold. And to me, that seems reasonable, but I think that's one thing that we would look at, because that's been questioned at, and say, okay, do we leave that or should it be tweaked? Quite frankly, I think maybe there should be some additional delegation for variances, because we're doing much more minor things at the council table. But yes, it's definitely looking at solutions to the problems that we see there. And some of them might be saying, okay, well, we can do something about it on the short term. Many of them we might not be able to.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Okay, council, any further comment on the motion on the table? I will then ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Sherlatt and Mayor Sulz are opposed. This has passed. Thank you. We'll now move on. Any other business arising from the minutes? So before we carry on, Councillor Palmer, you mentioned 2 councillors that you would like to see sit on this committee. Are you one councillor that would like to sit on this committee?
Yes, I would be quite happy to sit on the committee.
Okay. Is there another councillor that would like to sit on the committee with Councillor Palmer and interim CAO Matusi? Okay, seeing none, no other councillors wanting to sit on that committee, I will actually sit on that committee with you, Councillor Palmer. Even though I voted against this, I will definitely sit and believe that I can keep an open mind to what's going on. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely, Mayor Sulz. I think that would be quite appropriate, and we might have a balance between the two of us.
All right. All the other councillors, you're okay with that? Okay, then, so Councillor Palmer, you and I and Mr. Matusi will sit on this committee, and I'll get Mr. Matusi to organize things with staff, and then we can get started in the near future. Thank you. All right, let's move on. I have announcements from the mayor. I have several announcements today, so I would like to just take a moment here. First announcement, I'm just trying to get all of you on one screen here with sharing the screen. I'm not able to do that, but anyway, just want to welcome Mr. Matusi to Revelstoke. Thank you, Ron, for coming forward, for agreeing to be our interim CAO and to help us to find a permanent CAO. Definitely looking forward to having you here for the interim, and appreciate all that you can do for us. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Just thank you, Worship. It's a great opportunity. You have a great community, and I'm actually really looking forward to the couple months ahead and trying to find you a new CAO.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate your work on that. I have a couple more announcements. I want to say congratulations to a friend of mine, Kelly Christie, who has spent 30 years of service in our community as a paramedic. I've got to know Kelly over the years. We've both attended to some tragic events in the community, and she's always been there to look after those in need, whether it be an accident or a natural event. She's there. Some of the comments that I have from the community is, Kelly, you're their godsend. And I have to confirm that. With all that you've done for the community, you definitely are a godsend. And a couple other people have said that you're an angel in their corner when needed. And again, we've seen that time and time again. I want to thank you for your 30 years of service to the community of Revelstoke. I wish you many more years of service. And again, thank you for all that you do for us. Congratulations on this milestone. It's something that is definitely supported by all of your colleagues and by all of our community. So thank you very much. Thanks, Kelly. I just want to go on just briefly dealing with vaccines. So we are now into the second shot for those who are wanting that. So we're now seeing it starting on the 9th, going through to the 26th, usually Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then again next week, the same thing. But we're also seeing that those who are wanting a first dose and have been unable to get it so far can elect to do a drop-in on the following times from 9:30 to 11:30 and from 1:15 to 3 p.m. on Thursdays to Saturdays starting June 10th and finishing on June 26th. So just be aware the COVID vaccine is there for you. If you haven't had a chance to get it, I just encourage you. It's what's going to make the difference as we move forward. So thank you for that. And my last announcement, the recent news of the mass grave of 215 children at the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School has shocked the world and weighs heavily on our hearts. On behalf of the City of Revelstoke, we offer our condolences to Kamloops, to Sewupnik, and all other First Nations who've been impacted of this discovery. Our thoughts are with all First Nations, those who've been forever changed by the residential school system, those who experienced the unfathomable pain of seeing their kin sent to residential schools, and those whose kin never return, and those deeply affected by intergenerational trauma. In respect of those 215 children, I ask you now to take a moment of silence. Thank you. As we move on, we have 11A staff report. There's a motion on the table regarding the annual report, and I'm wondering if our council will put that motion forward. Councillor Elliott?
You mentioned the vaccine and the progress we're making in our community on the overall health. I'm wondering about the when we can actually get back to in-person meetings.
So we're probably going to look at maybe put a motion on the table for sometime in July. We'll do that at our next meeting. And part of that will be as to how we move forward with the September 15th thing with Dr. Henry. And then I'll get some advice from LGLA as we move forward. And then we can look at that. Are you okay with that, Councillor Palmer?
Mayor Sulz, so my understanding is that indoors we can have, is it 5 people right now that's permitted, or is 10 people for events?
It's 10 people.
So why, if it's 10 people, why could we not do this right away? We have basically 6 on council, the CAO, and staff can rotate out, because we're missing a huge dynamic here, body language, and that in-person thing. I think I think we're suffering as a community by not meeting in person. I'm just wondering why we couldn't meet in person right away.
Okay, so do you want to put a motion on the table that we go at the next meeting in camera, or pardon me, in person? Councillor Elliott?
Yes, Gary, I think it's vital that we get back in the same room. I think doing this remotely, we're missing a lot of stuff. So I think a chance to get everybody in I think that's a key step.
Okay,
So
you're
I'll put
willing?
that on the table. Yes.
All right. And is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Palmer. Any further discussion on getting back to a live meeting? Councillor Charlotte.
I'm just curious if we could hear from Mr. Matusi or maybe Ms. Floyd could fill us in if there is any technical considerations. We should be ready to, it should be relatively smooth to just go back, or if there's any concerns that way.
Ms. Floyd, any comment?
I would have to check with IT to see what Jeff thinks. It might be difficult to do the streaming without a minute taker in there. Someone, the corporate officer, well, Ron Matusi will be in there, but then the rest of the staff will not be able to participate or even watch.
Councillor Palmer, you have a comment?
So if we're allowed 10 people, there's 6 on council, mayor and 5 councillors. So that's 6. So we could have 4 staff members in the room at any given time. So the corporate officer and the CAO could be there, along with 2 other staff members or whoever needs to rotate in and out.
And then we would need a minute taker. And then, so if there is any staff presentation, it would be one at a time and or electronically. Mr. Matusi, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, if council would let us, we'll figure out the logistics and what things may or may not work. And bring that back to council. We could do that certainly in the forum. So council could pass the motion that, the next meeting, give us some time to figure out the logistics with the proviso that it might have to be postponed if there's a technical problem or some, I'm not sure what that is actually, but if it is, then we could at least move to try to get it done and report back to council how difficult, because I'm not sure how it's broadcast and some of those other questions. But again, this is certainly not my expertise. My first pandemic as a CAO, so I really don't have that background. But if council's comfortable with that, certainly Ms. Floyd and I could figure out the logistics, report back to council, and then you could decide to press the go button and operate, but at least knowing how logistically it'll be. It may be very simple, but
Great.
Maybe it won't.
All right, appreciate that. Councillor Ryan.
I was just gonna say, if we're live streaming, I'm not sure why we would need a minute taker, because in theory they could be live listening to things elsewhere. Also, I'm not going to be voting in favor of this until all Revelstoke has their second vaccine, as somebody who's immunocompromised. But if that is the will of council, I'll happily attend, and I guess I'll have to change out of my pajamas for once, but willing to do that for you guys.
Great. All right. Any further comments on that? I think that's a prudent comment that Councillor Ryan made, and was hoping to go to the next meeting before we put this forward to see where we are at with the vaccine program. But any further comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I will ask the question. So this is going live meetings as of next council meeting, if we're able to do it from a logistics point of view, from recording and live streaming, that sort of thing. All those in favor of going to the next meeting, please raise your hand. Okay, those opposed? So Councillor Ryan and myself, Councillor Sulz, opposed at this point, but this motion has passed. So I will get staff to look at seeing what we can do to go next meeting. And in the meantime, I will also be checking with where we're at with our vaccine program. All right, thank you for that, Council. We're now going to move on to 11A, staff report, the annual report. There's a motion on the table regarding the annual report. Is there a councillor that would like to put it on? Councillor Brooks Hill.
The 2020 annual report be made available for public inspection and be considered by council at the June 22nd, 2021 regular council meeting beginning at 3 p.m. electronically or not.
You're right. Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Elliott, any discussion on the motion or the annual report? All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask all in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Before we move on, I just want to thank our communications person, Sarah, for getting this annual report together and getting it out to the community. She's worked tirelessly at this, and I just want to say thank you for that. So, Sarah, thank you for your work in regards to that and for the staff that have supported her in getting everything together. Okay, 11B, Community Economic Development, the RMI funding allocation. So there is a motion on the table. Ms. Braun, do you want to make any statement or anything regarding that before we put the motion on the table?
I don't believe I need to. I think everything's contained in the report. We've been through this a number of times now, and I'll certainly take questions after the motion is made.
All right, thank you. So there's a councillor that want to put the motion on the table, please. Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, as put the motion as written in on the agenda.
Okay, is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Charlotte.
I'm just trying to pull up the details here, but in the minutes from the TIC meeting, it was hinted that further information would be coming to council for making the decision. I think it was around the Dark Horse Invitational.
Yes, I can speak to that through your worship.
Wonderful.
I did speak with our funder, Ministry of Tourism, and they confirmed that the funds this kind of expenditure is eligible for RMI funding. Questions I had about that with the TIC were whether or not we could provide RMI funds to a private entity such as the resort to build infrastructure that would require residents or visitors to ride the gondola to access the course. And the funder confirmed that that was absolutely a good plan, and that this is building infrastructure long-term that'll help to draw events to the community. So I think the only comment I would make is I want to emphasize you should think of this as an event that we're hosting that will actually attract future events as opposed to investing in infrastructure itself. Because the idea is to draw world-class free ride women's events to the community and support a space for women to train and compete in.
Any further comment, Councillor Charlotte? Okay, great. All right, Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, in the report, it had mentioned that a portion of funds allocated to some partners have not been spent due to RSTBC denial of trail development.
That specifically relates to the Jordan River Trail application that was denied by our Rec Sets and Trails BC because it was in a riparian area and therefore was protected, if you recall. And we had conditionally approved $20,000 for improving those trails, but we had not. I had not put in place a contract with the Alpine Club of Canada. Was waiting on the decision from the ministry for that. So those funds are back in the pot and have been reallocated.
Awesome. Thanks for the reminder.
Okay. Any further comments? So just for the public's benefit, I'm just going to read this, that the Resort Municipality Initiative funding of $73,350 be approved for the following project categories: recreation, trails and infrastructure, $15,600, events, programming and services, $57,750. Seeing no further comments, I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, Council. Appreciate that. Moving on to 11C, Development Services, Short-Term Rentals, Zoning Bylaw Amendment Discussion Paper. So, Ms. Wade, do you want to lead the discussion on this?
Thank you, Your Worship. I will try to share my screen with you. And, oh,
There we go.
can you see my screen now?
Yes.
And is it in presenters? Can you see the full screen?
We can see our city logo, Development Services Department, short-term rental, June 8th, 2021. So I think we've got it all.
Perfect. I'm a little rusty, so bear with me as I go through this. Okay, so thanks very much, Mayor and Council. I am before you today to talk with you about where we left off on the February 23rd, 2021 council meeting, where there was a fair amount of discussion. The point of today's presentation is to have a discussion with council and seek some direction so we can prepare the bylaws for consideration of first reading and second reading if possible. Hang on as I try to move this. There we go. So what we have before you today for the agenda is just a summary of the issue and some background information, which I'll go over quite quickly because we've been going through this over the last year. What staff has heard from the February 23rd and subsequent meetings with some council members so that we can address what we heard and propose some solutions and have a discussion about that and talk about next steps. So at the February 23rd meeting, there was a number of discussions and we are seeking resolution on what we heard on the discussion by council. And this will help us to provide direction on the amendments for the short-term rentals bylaw to enable enforcement of the current illegal operations. And I want to remind the council that what we're trying to achieve here is regulations in our zoning bylaw so we can enforce for this issue that has been a long-standing issue within the city and dates back to 2016 with some council resolutions, which I have just briefly put before you and is in your report. We have discussed these previously in regards to the September and November 2016 council resolutions, where council was seeking to have a zoning bylaw address the single family homes with or without suites, and also in relation to some caps and how we're going to enforce. So between 2019 and 2020 and where we are today, staff has engaged not only with council and committee of the whole and committees of council, but also with stakeholders in the community and conducted surveys, that's short-term rental surveys, to all pull together the proposed amendments that were before committee of the whole on February the 11th and rose out of committee of the whole to council on February 23rd. Just wanted to acknowledge that we established the guiding principles of why we were doing these zoning bylaw amendments and proposing it. And it was in regards to addressing a lot of the community concerns in regards to single family homes in neighborhoods and noise complaints, parking complaints, and also being a fair ground in regards to tourist accommodation and accommodation as to how fees would be collected and enforcement. And we have discussed that numerously with stakeholders and have consulted with the Revelstoke Accommodations Association as well. So what did we hear on February 23rd? I've outlined about 11 items that are outlined in your report. I've just gone through this high level and I will dig a little deeper in it as we move forward. But again, just to reiterate, why are we bringing forward the proposed zoning bylaws? There were some comments about, we're moving too fast and, why were we doing this? So just to reiterate that this has been council resolution since 2016 and that we have taken well over a year to consult and engage within the community to bring forward the proposed amendments that were before the committee of the whole on February the 11th and subsequent and previous committee of the wholes and council. So the idea is that we are trying to start somewhere with enforcement and we need regulations in order to do that in our zoning bylaw. So that is why we are addressing this today. The other comment was in regards to single family, and what we brought forward in the February 11th was also addressing two family dwellings or duplexes. And so we have dropped that as a proposal moving forward to just focus in on single family dwellings with or without secondary suites. And we can address duplexes at a later date as part of our zoning bylaw update. But the key here is to initiate bylaws that we can start doing enforcement on. So this is a first step, and we can see how this will evolve and move as we move forward with the zoning bylaw and our OCP updates. So now I'm going to move into single family dwellings with or without secondary suites. So one of the things we thought would be helpful is to actually discuss where the single family dwellings are in our zones. And they consist in our standard residential zones, our 4 zones. And we also have rural residential zones where the single family homes are permitted as well. And we have in our commercial zones, we have what we call non-conforming legal in some of our C1s, because we do have single family homes that have been there previous to our zoning bylaw adoption. We also have single family homes permitted in our C2 zones and our C6 zones. Most of these do not allow secondary suites in those single family homes at this time. And so what we would like to do is talk about these zones independently so that we can address each land use zone with how we would approach single family dwellings with or without a secondary suite. So our takeaway from this is what we heard council discussing was not to go forward with the duplex units at this time, because there was some current concern about the duplex units, and to focus in on the single family dwellings with or without suites. If council does not agree with that, then I would ask council to provide us with discussion on that and direction.
Any comments at this point, council? I think that was the consensus around the table during the last time we spoke about this. Okay, carry on, Ms. Wade.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So then the other question that came up was talking a little bit about our housing supply and how many single family homes have suites. We pulled the BC 2021 assessment data, and currently we have 2,009 single family dwellings in the city. We have 188 single family dwellings with suites. And so that would mean that we have 21 and change total single family dwellings. That 188 single family dwellings would represent 9% of our housing supply. Currently, we only have 59 secondary suite business licenses. So you can see we have a gap in our licensing. So approximately 129 illegal suites based on just those numbers. There'll be other conditions, but I'm just trying to use BC assessment because that's the best data we have available. And so one of the things that we're suggesting, which was alluded to in the 2016 resolution, was to look at a cap on the short-term rentals, because that would help us to manage the impact on on secondary suites and their use in the rental supply. So that's something that we're going to be talking about later on, but that was our takeaway from what we did with our assessment. And I don't know if you'd like me to stop here and ask any questions about this at this point in time.
Any questions? I know that back in 2016, our cap was 125 bedrooms. And basically we're looking at something higher than that. Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, so I think it's great. I think it's a great idea. I'm curious, so just to make sure I understand that last bullet point in the report says any newly constructed single family dwellings looking to pursue short-term rental would fall into this cap. So if there was like a new 100 new homes and the limit was 300, next year the limit would be like 310. Is that how it would work?
Ms.
So what, oh, sorry, Your Worship, through to Councillor Ryan. So what would happen is if we set a cap at 300, which is in your report, we would first of all take out the 29 vacation rentals that are currently spot zoned. And then we would look at the remainder, which we would offer, we got 11 applications that have been in advance, waiting for what was going to happen with the zoning bylaws and amendments. So
are those the ones with the secondary suites? Most of them?
yes, most of them have
Okay.
secondary suites. And so then with any new construction, it would be whoever brings on or comes into compliance, first come, first serve until we reach 300. And we would review that on an annual basis.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if I understand then. So if the cap is 300, does the oh gosh, does it grow every year with new construction?
No.
Oh, okay, so it's not 10% of all, second or whatever single family dwellings. It's 300, and then we just review as needed.
Correct. And the 10% I think you're pulling from is what I put forward as an adjustment because of the host compliance number, which is nearer in, and it's not a very accurate database. So we're just saying take 10% off of the 328 and let's just cap it at 300 because we don't have certainty of in that number how many are in our city limits and how many are not.
Gotcha. I'm curious if staff thinks it's a good idea to include some kind of percentage increase based on new construction or something like that, just so that we're not, I don't know, so we have kind of like a fixed ratio.
I think I would recommend that we just look at this in a year from now and then address where we might want to go.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Gillette.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple questions. One, the 300 cap. Your Worship, you mentioned 125 bedrooms as the previous cap. I understood this to be 300 short-term rentals, each of which could have more than one bedroom. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
No.
I was just stating what, so clarify that's for me, Ms. Wade, but back in 2016, was it not 125 bedrooms, or was it? Yes. And then anticipating that there would be a party of two to each bedroom. What we're talking about now is not bedrooms, but short-term rental accommodations. So whole
So
house or
licensed,
suite or whatever. Yes.
Great. Okay. Good to know. And then the other question. I really appreciated this report. It was really well done. I like how it's focusing on simplifying things, and there is it's complicated. So breaking out the multifamily. Now, one thing you mentioned was that it's first come, first serve. So this cap would this only apply to short-term rentals in single family homes, or would this? And so that when we get to the point of bringing in regulation for multifamily homes, duplexes, and the like, would they also fall under the same cap, or would we designate a different cap for them? Because otherwise, if it's a first come, first serve, in theory, it could get filled up with single family homes so that the multifamily homes wouldn't have a shot to get in.
Yeah. Through your worship to Councillor Gillette. Yeah, it's a more complicated unit dealing with the multifamily, and I sort of talk about that as I go through the presentation a little bit to walk you through the report. I know this is great conversation, and so what we are looking at is trying to focus on the single family and acknowledge what's existing right now in the commercial zones, and then we're going to identify some issues that we do need to look at in the zoning bylaw. But how are we going to deal with commercial zones right now with our current situation?
All right. I look forward to the rest of the conversation then. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Sir Elliott, you have a question before we move on?
Yes, Your Worship. There's roughly 2,200 single-family homes, just looking at the numbers, 2,200 roughly. 59 have suites with a business license, right? So those 59, are they vacation rentals? Of the 125 that we currently we're supposed to have, 59 have business licenses. Is that what I take for this?
So through your worship to Councillor Elliott, I just want to clarify. So right now with secondary suites in our single family homes, we have 59 business licenses. In regards to vacation rentals, we have 60 business licenses, which is coming up in my presentation. So it's okay.
Yeah, so the 125 that we've allocated for vacation, are they complete? Are they? Do we have 125 legitimate vacation rentals in our town? Maybe it's on the next slide.
So if I could just answer that. So 125 is 125 bedrooms. So as His Worship has said, what happened with that resolution is it said 125 bedrooms based on 2 people to a maximum of 250 people. So if you divided that 125, right, and you said it was going to be a 2-bedroom unit, we actually we're kind of in that range because we already have 60 vacation rentals. And our problem is greater than that. So that's why we need to revisit that. And part of that resolution was for staff to come back and actually talk about whether that policy would be, could be implemented, or was there a better way of addressing it? And so that's the conversation we're having today.
Okay. So any comment, Councillor Elliott, or should we allow Ms. Wade to move on?
Yeah, Gary, let's just move on. I think
okay.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, we may get more information as we move on. Okay, Ms. Wade, carry on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So in regards to restricting the number of short-term rentals citywide, there was a conversation about, if we allow it in all the zones, how are we going to manage the impact on our housing supply? So we have sort of jumped ahead a bit, so I'll go through this quickly, is that what we did is we went to the host compliance. As of early this year, there was 328 short-term rentals listed, and we know that we only have 60 licensed, so we know we have a gap, and that how the host compliance states it is it's in or near the area. So we know that we have a problem with the database, which we discussed at previous meetings. So we're just adjusted it by 10%. So we rounded it down to 300. And key here is that this would not include the resort, because the resort is under the Master Development Agreement and is dictated by the province and has requirements to put heads on beds on the resort as part of their agreement with the resort for their lands. So it's a very different scenario than the rest of the city. And then also the CD zones that have been adopted have allowed for vacation rentals. And so that right is embedded in that zoning. So they're allowed to do them. And so what we would include in this cap is the 29 spot zone short-term rentals that we have. And then we would review annually. And if we used a 300 cap, it would represent 13% of our single family dwelling supply. So that means that no more than 13% of our single family dwellings would be occupied with short-term rentals. So that puts the limit on it, which I think addresses some of the conversation that I heard at the February 23rd council meeting, where we wanted to make sure we limited the impact of short-term rental on our rental supply. And so the new construction, anything newly constructed after these bylaws are adopted, would fall into this cap, and there would be approximately 260 short-term rental business licenses available. And we have 11 short-term rental requests that are in abeyance that was the result of the 2016 resolution that basically defeated those rezonings and put and ask staff to look at a zoning bylaw amendment to address short-term rentals within single-family homes and single-family homes with secondary suites. So I can move forward with this if that's okay.
Yes, carry on. Thank you.
So then the next conversation we talked a little bit was about permanent resident and designation of short-term rental to just the suite use. So I just wanted to go through that the zoning is for use and not user, and we have to be very careful in how we word things so that we don't, we're not discriminatory. So staff's recommendation is to continue with the definition of permanent resident, which was before you and is in your summary within your attached to your report, and that to restrict the suite to only be the short-term rental. Staff feels that this would have some impact on our housing supply and a price point for the rental population or owners, and would decrease the flexibility for people to build a house and live in the suite, rent out the top, or for somebody to occupy the upper part of the building and then do the short-term rental in the basement. So the flexibility staff feels is important, because we never know what households do or happens, and there might be a situation where the household changes and they need to have another way of doing some income to support them so they can actually stay in their house. So if there's any, is there any questions on this one, or should I move on?
Any comments, councillors? Councillor Runt.
Yeah, so this is I really appreciate this report, and thank you for including that, because this was the one of the things that I was requesting a little bit more information on. I'd love to hear from other councillors what your thoughts are on the secondary suite, restricting it to the secondary suite, because in my opinion, you know, we have such a shortage of rental housing already. My concern is that if we don't restrict it to the secondary suite, then we're going to see a lot of people rent out the upstairs of their, 4 or 5 bedroom home, and then just stick, one ski bum in the basement kind of thing, and say, well, it's okay, we have a long-term tenant there, but then the upstairs of the house goes to vacation rentalers who, are, not permanent residents. And I think if that happens everywhere, then that would kind of erode the neighborhood and just decrease our supply of housing, where if it was restricted to the secondary suite, then, it's that person who needs that supplemental income, but they still live in that home. Curious what other people's thoughts are.
Any comments? Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, Councillor Ryan. One of my big concerns is affordability in our town, and I think people are finding a way to live here by renting their place out, and the rental game is very complicated right now. I mean, people don't want long-term residents in their basement. Typically, if they could have someone for 3 months and gain the same income, it's an affordable way to do it and still have their home. So it's a complicated issue. It's not a simple one. I realize we need rental space in our community, but we just don't have enough other options than individual homes. We have no apartments, we have no condos, we have no smaller facilities. So it's a really big problem, and I don't think any community has found an easy solution to this. So I like what we're doing, but I think it just needs a full discussion, flesh out all the elements that are involved, and just put it on and try to battle our way through it. It's not, and there'll be mistakes. I think right now, I think we need a lot more work on this. It's my take.
Yeah, just to respond, if I may, Your Worship, I think
yes.
I think you're totally right that people don't want long-term tenants in their basement if they don't have to, right? That's like somebody who's always in your space. But if it's supplemental income and you can rent it out, for a few weekends in the winter or over Christmas or whatever you want, then that's a great option to give people. And so to me, that's like, the best use of short-term rentals is it's that supplemental income. and it makes it more affordable for people who otherwise would not be able to live here or buy their home or but what I think the beauty of restricting it to that secondary suite is that we're not getting into the situation where we have just one long-term tenant and then like 4 vacant rooms or 3 vacant rooms if it gets maxed at 3 rooms per single family dwelling. And that's where I think it's really concerning, is then you almost are promoting or incentivizing people to turn their mega mansion into not mega mansion, but just like their big single family home into 75% of it being a vacation rental. So if you just think of the numbers alone, right, it's like what we have the option right here to either make it so that say there's like 4 bedrooms in a house, 3 upstairs, 1 in the basement. Either we're going to allow people to rent 3 bedrooms short-term rental, or we're going to allow them to rent 1 bedroom as a short-term rental. Of course, people are going to choose the one that makes them the most money. They put 1 ski bum in the basement. That's great. We now have 1 long-term tenant, even though there's a huge demand for long-term rentals. And now we have 3 bedrooms that are, serving short-term renters, as opposed to it being flipped. If we were to require that it be in the secondary suite, now we've opened up 75% to long-term rentals because, that person who maybe doesn't live here, who lives in Calgary, they can't have a vacation rental in the basement unless they have a full-time resident. So now you actually are encouraging more people to we're encouraging more long-term rentals by restricting it to the basement or the secondary suite.
Okay, so I'll play the devil's advocate here, where someone who's able to get into the housing market, I'm not sure how mortgages work now, but if they're able to get into the housing market and can live in the basement and rent out their top of their home to help pay for their home, we now have a permanent resident living in their own home, but they're using the space up above, which is more desirable for short-term rental, and are able to own their home and still rent it out to those who want to visit our community. So by allowing them to make the decision one way or the other gives the homeowner options. Councillor Rund.
Yeah, I think that's a really great comment. My only sort of response would be that in that scenario, we're sort of prioritizing the people who, in your version of the world, can afford to purchase a home, versus the issue that we're facing right now is that businesses can't find anybody to operate their businesses. So it's not, we could definitely talk about this for hours and hours about, who should and shouldn't have access to these places to live. But at the end of the day, if you think about the people who are going to be most affected, like in the report, it talks about long-term residents, who can't afford to live here anymore. And if those are the types of people that we want to be thinking about, I think it's in our best interest to restrict it to the secondary suite, because those are the people who will be most negatively impacted.
So I will go again, I'll get right to you, Councillor Elliott. So if I want to retire and rent out part of my home, and I can rent out the upper portion for short-term rental, my wife and I live in the lower area, and because we can't go anywhere else, there is no downsizing in the community. So the only way to stay is to be able to rent out part of our house. We're going to be able to rent out the top portion if it's allowed, and be able to stay in the community, a community which my wife was born and raised here. So I look at it from that perspective. If we give the homeowner the option of what's going to work out best for them, we're keeping people in the community. I'm not saying that this is a defined and the only way. I'm just saying that there is always a corollary to what we're intending. So that's just my comment.
Yeah, I think it's a good comment. I think it isn't seeing the bigger picture.
Point taken. Councillor Elliott, you have a comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think the neighborhood concern, the possible degradation, or the having the temporary resident, a wild party animal living down the street or that's in there on the weekend, and those are legitimate concerns for the neighborhood. But I'm wondering, I'm just curious how valid that is, or how prevalent it is in our town. You know, we're not. I mean, we've grown in our tourism base and we've progressed over the last number of years, but you know, maybe it's just the neighborhood I live in. I don't see a craziness in our town. And talking to the police force, I don't think there's. I mean, sure, there may be a noise complaint, but it's not proliferating throughout. And, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm off on that. But I just don't know if we have that neighborhood degradation that's been proposed or suggested. But I don't think that's an actual reality in our town.
Yep, point taken. I tend to agree. I'm not seeing that. I know in some areas it depends on, of course, the owner of the short-term rental. Are they willing to allow, you know, people to come in and do whatever they want, or are they willing to say these are the rules? We need to be good neighbors. We need to abide by the rules, and go from there. So. Any further comment on this, or can we get Ms. Wade to move on? Councillor Charlotte, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just weighing in briefly. I think the guiding principles that Ms. Wade highlighted at the beginning of this conversation, which is to protect and meet the long-term rentals needs of the community, and allowing for a range of accommodation types that meet the diverse visitor needs. So I think short-term rentals, part of the appeal is being able to rent part or most of a home for a family, a group that wouldn't necessarily fit well into a hotel. And I don't know that only secondary suites would serve that need. So looking at that guiding principle to try and allow for a range of accommodation, I think I would lean more to that, like being cautious about how many restrictions to put on things, and looking at protecting and meeting the long-term rental needs of the community. I think that the cap on short-term rentals is the tool to look at for that, in my mind, rather than deciding whether it is the secondary suite or the main dwelling that is being rented out, because we're capping the number of those business licenses that are being issued. And to meet the long-term rental needs of the community, as Councillor Elliott was saying, is it's more complicated than just single-family homes. We need apartment buildings, we need condos, we need those downsizing options for our residents. And that bigger book of work is going to help address those needs better. I don't think we're going to solve that problem just with how we regulate short-term rentals. I think that this conversation is going really well. It's nice to be able to discuss these different details. And I think once we have a bylaw to be able to do first reading and go to public consultation, that fulsome discussion will come forward, and we'll be able to find something that works for us and for this community, hopefully with review embedded, like what Ms. Wade was saying, with reviewing the cap on an annual basis, that we can adjust as we find, like, ooh, that's not really hitting what we wanted it to hit. Let's adjust back to this.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan?
Yes, I have a couple comments. The first to Nichol, to Councillor Gillette. That's a good point about the different uses. I think it's very true that people, when they come visit a place, will want varying degrees of, niceness, or, whole homes or whatever. But I do think too, the CD zones are partially serving that need, because they aren't in our residential neighborhoods, and those are the places where you can rent, a full home or a full condo or whatever. The other thing is, I really would encourage and councillors or yourselves, the mayor, to think about not necessarily how this would impact you and your friends, but how this affects the community more broadly. Because I think if we don't do this type of thing now, it's a lot more difficult to adjust back, as Councillor Charlotte said, versus, being too restrictive and then loosening things if we've seen that we were like a little bit too severe in the rules that we impose, versus trying to take something back once we've given it to people. So I would love to put a motion forward to restrict it to the secondary suite if somebody else would second that. If not, I will stop talking.
Mayor Sulz, if I may.
For Palmer.
I'm wondering if Councillor Ryan might want to hold that motion until the end of the presentation, because there may be some additional information.
Yeah, good point. Happy to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Let's carry on. Councillor Elliott, you have a comment before we carry on?
Just a couple things, Gary, extra, sorry, Your Worship.
No, that's fine.
Just when this originated in 2016, the pressure to put a bylaw in place, there was a bit of an uproar about employee housing, the lack of it that was being provided by the hotels, the new hotels. There was nothing, new businesses weren't providing it, and that was a big obstacle in 2016 that we haven't. I mean, I think the new developments that we have are implementing employee housing as part of it. So that's a big win, and I think that will alleviate some of the pressure on this short-term bylaw vacation rent. And the other thing was ensuring the rental market stays intact. Broadly, the rental game is changing. Like, people don't want to rent suites to long-term tenants. That's Vancouver to Newfoundland. That's the way it's going right now. So it's a tough one. So to find the other thing, that if we go in and restrict a home from putting in a short-term, and we allow some guy down the street to do it, the guy down the street has got a significant increase in the value of his home. And who are we to allocate who and who's going to make that gain? We don't. There's no way to tax the vacation rental significantly, and I'm not sure that's a fair measure we're going to be putting in place.
Thank you for those comments. Councillor Ryan, do you have another comment?
I do, yeah. I think that's a really great point that Councillor Elliott just brought up about people trending to not wanting to rent long term. It's, I think, naive of us not to think that that's happening here. And so when I think about that, I think even more reason to restrict it, because the way that we've structured the current proposals to amend the bylaw are such that we would be requiring that a long-term tenant be on site. So it's actually so good if we do restrict it to the secondary suite, because we're saying either you live upstairs or long-term tenants live upstairs in your 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house. So we're actually, in restricting it, we are preserving long-term rentals in a way that we wouldn't be doing if we allowed flexibility, because if we allow the flexibility and don't restrict it, then you can have people who live downstairs in that, 1 or 2 per people, and then have this whole upstairs be vacation rentals. And in that mix, you have a lot fewer long-term tenants. So anyways, I think it was a good point, and it's more reason that I think we should be restricting it.
All right, thank you for your comment. Okay, let's move on, Ms. Wade, if we may.
Yes, Your Worship. So the other thing we heard at the discussion was about tourist accommodation in commercial zones, carriage houses, and garden homes. So one of the things we need to do in our zoning bylaw is create a tourist accommodation zone that would permit for a kind of accommodation that is greater than 3 bedrooms and also exists in a multifamily, that would have a check-in desk, centralized booking system. Those are all best practices from other communities. These need to be explored further in our zoning discussions, but we're aware of them and staff knows that we need to address these. I also wanted to say that we would not allow short-term rentals in carriage houses or garden homes. The other thing is just to clarify what enforcement is. And it would be the 3-month, sorry, now I got a dry throat, 3-month grace period after the bylaw is adopted. Maximum fine is $1,000 per day and be complaint based until we can have a bylaw officer hired through a business case, which we hope to achieve through the fees for cost recovery. And then we have to do the amendments to the business law, like business license bylaw, fees and charges, and MTI. There were some conversations about BC assessment, and we have contacted BC assessment They set the classification, which will impact the property tax. There's no distinguish in a class for short-term rental in a single-family dwelling. We also looked at fees for short-term rentals in single-family dwellings with using an example of a 3-bedroom rental. And we looked at the various municipalities, and the range in fees would be anywhere from $300 to $750. So staff would look at these fees and do a business case to support what we would need to cost recover to have a dedicated bylaw enforcement officer, administration, and other costs associated with this. And then we would also look at the evaluation of any impact to water and sewer fees as part of that. Is there any questions about this?
And these fees you're talking about are per dwelling per year, is that correct?
Yes, these would be on an annual business license fee.
All right, thank you. Any questions, councillors, before we carry on? Councillor Charlotte?
Just a quick comment that thank you very much for reaching out to BC Assessment. I appreciate that. I know we've talked about it quite a few times, so I appreciate you guys had a good conversation with them.
Welcome.
Councillor Elliott?
So with this arrangement, so I've got a single family home. My next door neighbor has one with a basement suite that they rent out short-term vacation rental. He generates $300 a night for that suite, but he's taxed. The assessment is virtually the same.
Yes.
The house value, yeah. So he's paying no more for infrastructure or even though his income from that place is significant, very significant, and the home is 3 times as valuable if you just look at it as an asset.
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, this is based on BC Assessment. BC Assessment does these classifications, and that in turn leads to the property taxes.
Yeah.
So what I wanted, that is not our discussion, like that's BC Assessment in the province and how they classify things. Yes. And then that's passed on to us.
Yeah. It's just, I think as a way to get over that is, whether we can, I guess Tofino charges $750 for a business license. And I wouldn't have to pay that, but my neighbor who's got a vacation home would. So I'm just saying, what is a fair rate? Maybe 700 is not enough. Maybe we bump it to 1,000, and if there's 300 of them, that's $300,000 that we have an extra revenue that's charged from the vacation rental people. And I just think there's an easy solution. And I just if we just stick with the existing format, it's very rigorous. But I think there's an easier way. Just my take.
So through your worship to Councillor Elliott, we as the municipality can only charge fees for cost recovery, and we have to prove out what our costs are to support those fees. And so we have to look at what it's going to cost us for a bylaw enforcement officer, what it's going to cost for administration, and those costs. And that's how Tofino and Golden have, for example, done their business case. And that I'll be working with our director of finance to do the business case so that we are doing a cost recovery, which we are under legislation mandated to do. We can't make money on this. We have to do cost recovery.
Right. So that doesn't include infrastructure, extra extra use of the services, extra policing, extra, does it? I mean, there are fees that come with tourism that we can find a way to put an estimate to. So I just wonder if that's an option.
So in regards, through your worship to Councillor Elliott, in regards to those sorts of issues, impacts on the city from a tourism point of view are at a larger scale. And some of that comes into the other ways we collect funding to support the impact of tourism. And those are larger questions. That's why we get a percentage tax back to help with marketing and other infrastructure projects. So what Director Braun was talking about previously in regards to the MRDT and the resort, our resort strategy for development and how we use those monies that we recover from are very important in our long-term planning.
Thank you. Mr. Matusi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that, sitting here now listening and having gone through the report, once again, I think it's really important that council, really has to decide what the problem they're trying to solve is. There's lots of different things you could do. I mean, is it about the rental market? And I think that it's almost a resolution. What are the goals of this? And then is it? Maybe it isn't about the sanctity of the neighborhood and the every person's home is their castle, and if it's being disrupted by something that's not a traditional use in a single residential zone, single family zone, is that a concern of council? Third, could be the point that Councillor Elliott's raising in terms of, in many ways, unfair competition. That not only is it unfair that people are using infrastructure, but they're also not paying commercial taxes, and there are people paying commercial taxes, and this is a way to bypass it. Some communities that don't have a diversity of tourist accommodation are actually encourage short-term rentals. I mean, there are bylaws that their view is to try to be as flexible as possible. Others are very, very concerned about restricting because of the rental market, almost primarily because of the rental market, although there's always the commercial people. So, I think it's really important as council goes through this that those, the problem you're trying to solve is foremost in your mind, because depending on what that is, you could follow these different roads. The other part is it's super complex. I've yet to see a community. I've dealt with 4 of them in the last year that are all grappled with this. They grappled with them in different ways, that have found an easy way to do it. And so I would suggest, council, that if there is within this report something that council can get behind, that okay, it is about restricting the numbers because we are concerned about short-term rental, regardless of whether it's the top floor or the bottom floor. That's up to council. Or the fees. You can't tax these, so it has to be, as Ms. Wade said, a cost recovery. I would suggest that it's going to be an iterative process anyways. In my experience, anytime you mess with a market, there's always unintended consequences. So regardless of what you do, there will be unintended consequences a year from now that you're probably going to have to adjust. So the first question for me, council, is: are you prepared to make changes to deal with short-term rentals? Yes or no? Laissez-faire or those regulations. And if you are, what particular area you're trying to focus on? Is it the shortage of rental units? As a second, and then third, the question of fairness, which may determine the fee you ultimately put in or not. But also recognize there's no perfect solution. I think what you're trying to get here is the best solution that all of you can agree on, and knowing that this will be an iterative process. And I would suggest that one of the good things about the cap is it doesn't make it tries not to make the problem worse until you've had time to look at those implications, and you may decide to beef it up, or you may decide to scrap it all together. But again, those are just my comments, sitting back and listening to some of the comments that councilors coming up with. I'm not sure if that clarified anything for me, but I would focus on the goal.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Matusi. All right, Ms. Wade, let's carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is just a summary of what is outlined in your report, and what we've talked to is, what are we really proposing? So let's look at the residential regulations. What we're proposing to deal with the residential, and what I mean by residential is dealing with our residential zones, our land uses. So our R1s to our R4s, and our rural residential are our Rs. And so in here, we're basically saying that it would be permitted only in a single family dwelling with a suite. And it would be permitted only when operated by a permanent resident residing in the single family dwelling on the lot where the short-term rental is occurring. So up either in the upper part of it or the lower part of it. For every room rented, there has to be 1 parking stall. And we're recommending that we decrease from 4 bedrooms, which is where we started the conversation and which is in our vacation rental currently, and that is being used in our CD zones, to 3. And we're recommending that because that's best practices in other municipalities and has less of an impact on the neighborhoods. And one of the reasons why we're recommending that is because when we did survey the community, one of the concerns that the neighborhoods had is that they have some way of monitoring the number of people there, that there's 24/7 contact, that the adequate parking's provided. So by going to the best practices of 3 bedrooms, then that means there's a maximum of 6 people in that house that would be there at any one time.
Councillor Ryan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I did have one, but then I forgot it. How stupid of me. Sorry.
All right. Carry on, Ms. Wade.
And then
Councillor Charlotte, you have a question before Ms. Wade carries on?
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question on the parking topic. It said 1 parking stall per rented bedroom. Is there separate parking requirements for the second suite?
Correct, there is. Yeah. So that's on top of it. Yeah. So with the commercial zoning, what we have, and when I talk about commercial, I'm talking about the C1, C2, and C6 zones. Historically, single-family dwellings without suites have been allowed to operate as short-term rentals, and so they have been permitted. What we're saying is that if there is a single-family house in a commercial zone, that it be property managed by a permanent resident of the city and doesn't live, and who wouldn't live on the site. So it would be a local property management person who resides here for easy access for 24/7. And also we just wanted to highlight that anything that would be more than 3 bedrooms, we should be looking at a tourist accommodation zone, which we do not currently have. And that'll be something that we're going to address when we do the zoning bylaw update.
Councillor Ryan?
Hi, I remembered it. So if there's more than, so let's say there's 4 bedrooms upstairs, but then in their application, they only put down 3, but then in their ads, they say 4 bedroom or like can sleep 8 people. How does that get monitored?
So through your worship to Councillor Ryan, that would be a violation because it's only 3 bedrooms that we would permit, except for those that are already were approved with 4 bedrooms, which is what the vacation rentals were, all the V zones. So what we're saying is if you're under the new bylaws and it's 3 bedrooms and you're advertising for 4, then that would give us a rationale to then enforce.
Right, but it would have to be, I guess, complaints driven.
Well, not necessarily, because one, we were going to require that you have your license on the webpage as you're advertising. Mm-hmm. And then the other would be that with the business case and the fees to support a dedicated bylaw officer, they would do enforcement. So they could check up on the licensing.
Cool, thanks.
All right. Okay, carry on, Ms. Wade, thanks.
Your worship. So next steps. So this is where we're looking for council considerations. I've put a few up here that, direct staff to prepare a policy to cap the short-term rentals at 300 units citywide based on our discussion to date. And then we would put in policies that would come back to council for your consideration. In regards to and then we are looking about preparing the short-term bylaws for first and second reading. At the last council meeting, February 23rd, the resolution was just to bring it for first reading. But with this discussion, we're hoping council might be more comfortable with moving forward with a first and second reading so that we can move forward to public hearing on this matter. And then the other thing is any other directions that council may wish to give staff. And then the direction you give us today, we'll take it away and draft up the bylaws. And if you wish to do a cap, we would draft a policy. And that's all I have at this moment, and I look forward to any more questions.
Okay, Council, any comments, questions on the considerations in front of you? Let's talk about preparing a policy to cap short-term rental at 300 units citywide. Any appetite to make that resolution? Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Brooks Hill, either one of you want to speak to that? Councillor Charlotte and then Councillor Brooks Hill.
Yeah, I appreciated the math that was done on this and the best practices of how to encourage suites to come into compliance. I think that is one of our issues with our rental pool, regardless of whether short-term or long-term, is that we have illegal suites rather than legit. And there's safety concerns with that. So if this helps incentivize people to bring them in compliance and then make the choice whether they go short-term rental business license or if they do consider long-term rentals, because while I appreciate that short-term rentals might be more cash flush, I suppose, there are values to having long-term renters, I swear. So yeah, I support that.
Okay, Councillor Brooks Hill and then Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, I definitely support this. As Mr. Matusi said, I see this sort of as like the safety valve, because no matter what we do, there's going to be unintended consequences. But having this limit in place means that we can't have a huge unintended consequence. There can just be smaller ones. And in general, my feeling with where we're going with this, I see it more as a framework that, as Mr. Matusi said, we're going to be coming back in a year. We're going to be tweaking it or changing it or throwing it out. This is... We're doing something. I feel like we're going in the right direction. I don't think we're going to get it perfectly right the first time, but we have to do something, and I think that this is a good step forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I'm just a little bit confused. Is there a motion on the table, or are we just having further discussion on the report?
We haven't got to the motion yet. We're going to do that in a moment. They wanted to make comment first, and then both of them, I believe, wanted to make that comment.
Okay. So just a couple things then on the report in general. I guess I'm a little bit confused because in the February 23rd, yes, there was a lot of dialogue and different opinions, but there was a resolution to come back with a bylaw. And so there was, in my mind, there was clear dialogue or a resolution from council on the February 23rd. So it seems like we're another 3.5 months has gone by, and we're sort of re-thrashing stuff and trying to get this perfect solution, which we won't find. So that's just a general comment, because it seems to me, my expectation is that there was going to be a bylaw some time ago. I do have a question on the 300 units cap. So we're talking regarding a zoning amendment to allow the short-term rentals, if I'm understanding correctly, is what's being proposed, but a cap 300. And that feels very similar to what the previous council, and you were part of that, Mayor Sulz, of the cap before. And so there was some questions on fairness. Is there going to be this rushed, who's going to be first to get it? And can we do that with zoning? So is there entitlement if we have short-term rentals? So maybe I'm confused and not understanding some little subtle difference there, but it's just a couple questions there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, before when we had this come to council before, we had a cap of 125 bedrooms, and then we changed things to do spot zoning so people could actually zone their property vacation rental. And I believe that ended up being problematic. And we didn't get, the 125, we got to that, heartbeat. What we're talking about now is not 125 bedrooms, but we're talking about 300. When we talk 300 units, Ms. Wade, are we talking about 300 business licenses, just for clarification for both Councillor Palmer and myself.
Through your worship, yes, it would be, because the business licenses would be associated with the short-term rental, and we would limit the number of units.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to get it simple, and maybe I'm just not following it, but we're talking about changing the zoning to allow the blanket short-term rentals across in residential areas, but then we're going to restrict that to 300?
Ms. Wade.
Yes, your worship. The idea is to restrict the number of business licenses and to permit short-term rentals in the conditions that they would be in residential they would have to have a secondary suite and a permanent resident on site, which was the feedback we got from the community. And then the second one is trying to address the commercial zones where we have single family homes that have been permitted as short-term rentals. And so we're saying in the commercial zones, you could have a single family house with or without a suite, because the C1 zone is one that does not allow single family homes, but they do exist, and they are legal non-conforming because they're before the zoning bylaw, because they're 1910 houses. And they and so we're trying to address that situation that we have. So we would allow them in the commercial zones to have a license for short-term rental, and they could be a single family house or they could be one with a suite, but that's through the commercial zones. So
any further comment, Councillor Palmer?
Okay, so the 300 units, we're talking about the residential, or are we talking the entire number?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, we're talking about citywide, so it would apply to both residential and commercial.
Okay, and the merits, the reason for the cap is we think that might be the right number for our community is 300 short-term vacation rentals.
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, based on host compliance, we currently have 328 listed on the platform. And we are adjusting it down because we know that there's some issues with the database, which we talked about at previous council meetings. And so we're suggesting that this is a good place to start so we can bring those illegal short-term rentals into compliance and legitimize them.
Okay, and then and again, I'm just trying to understand it. So once we hit that 300 cap, then a residential home that meets all the other requirements would not be able to get the short-term residential, even though they have the zoning for that. Is that correct?
Ms. Wade.
Yep, to Councillor Palmer, that would be correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, if somebody applies and the 300 has already been met, do they go on like a wait list? Is that what would happen?
Ms. Wade.
Your worship to Councillor Ryan, that would be part of our bringing it back to council on the annual review and assessing what we would like to do. And we would have to look at a broader range. We'd have to look at the economics with tourism. I would interact with Director Braun on that, and we'd have to look at what the supply is and demand for tourist accommodation. Like, we have to do a bigger dive into that so that we make sure we understand what's going on in our supply and demand in our economy.
Right. I'm just, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to seek really good public feedback if we don't have clarity on how the system's going to fully work. I know that we can't have all of the kind of details nailed down, but something like, is there going to be a wait list, or like, is the priority going to go to people who had one license the following year? Would they get, did they take precedence over the new applicant? That type of thing. Yeah, but I'm all in favor of a cap. I think it's a good idea. And like Councillor Brooks-Hill said, it's like a bit of a safety for us.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Palmer.
But my comment or question isn't on the merits of the 300 or not, but it's just me understanding. So we can restrict someone that has zoning for short-term residential after the 300 is met. That's something that we can legally do, is say, no, you can't do that because we've hit a cap. I'm just trying to understand that mechanism, because it seems like they have the zoning that there is an entitlement if they're meeting requirements, but the 300 will supersede the zoning provisions.
So through your worship to Councillor Palmer, this was done in Nelson. And what they did is they used the policy to restrict the number of business licenses, which I understand that we can do. It's a way of monitoring. Maybe Mr. Matuzzi has some input on that. But that's my understanding, and I've seen it in other communities as well, in restricting that, because that's a way of managing the impact on the community.
Yeah, and I understand the community aspects. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Matuzzi, comment?
Your worship, the alternative, and it's good that other communities are using this. I mean, I would agree with Councillor Palmer that it's not the normal way. Zoning usually confers some rights on the individual, so I think his question's a good one. But if other communities have found ways to try to implement this, I think this is a way that you're doing it by council policy. The alternative approach would be to create a specific zone, almost like spot zoning, and then have a council policy that places a moratorium. And so you could almost place the moratorium on it today, create the zone, and then be able to do it. So if this is a way to do it, it may be a way that's less onerous than following I'd say a more traditional approach is spot zoning, in which you then have a council policy limiting it, or having a moratorium on rezoning, which has its own other rules.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. And thank you regarding the comments, just regarding the spot zoning. I think that was the struggle that the previous council had. It became a bit of a zoo for them, I believe. I have just some general comments. I have, of course, there's all these little issues, and we're just on one little piece here on the short-term rentals. I wonder, and it's just a question, and just nobody comment if it just want to pass it by, but I'm wondering if we would be better to restrict the zone for short-term rentals closer to the resort, rather than areas, say, like the Big Eddy and Columbia Park, where it might be better, where secondary suites are used for those long-term rentals. I know there ends up being a whole bunch of other things around that, but it seems to me that maybe it's diluting the short-term rental experience that that many would expect coming into a resort community. Anyway, that's just a thought.
I think when we talk about around the fringe area around the resort, I think we need to. There's already some short-term rentals in there that are different than what we see and have a different experience, and I think they should be regulated a little bit differently as we move forward. Councillor Elliott, you have a comment.
Just regarding Tim's comment there about the resort as a spot zone, with David Evans's current endeavor, it's phase 2 and 3 are 100 units. Is that right? And they're all classified as short-term rentals. And the previous unit 1 was 40 to 45 units. So that leaves 155 for the rest of the city. And there's 125 already taken. So there's only 25 new units that are available. Is that what I understand?
No. Ms. Wade, do you care to explain, please?
Your worship, the city zone in BYLAWS is included phase 2 and 3.
Right. Thank you. So the CD zone for Mackenzie Village phase 2 and 3 allows them to have vacation rentals, and there's no cap on it and no limit.
clarity for you, Councillor Elliott? You're muted.
One of the consideration was to prepare a policy to cap short-term rentals 300 units citywide. Is that different?
Through the worship to Councillor Elliott, yes, what I mentioned in my presentation is that RMR and the CD zones would be exempt from that because they already have those rights within their zoning. And there's the definition for vacation rental is embedded in some of those CD zonings as well. And the resort itself is a different animal because it is an agreement with the province, and they earn development rights based on their ski lift capacity. And as they build those amenities, they earn the ability to have dwellings, and most of them are tourist accommodation orientated. And there's a formula and a rollout plan that is legislated from the province, and the province refers to us.
Well, I guess the biggest outspoken people against the short-term rentals were the hotels, and they argued against it because the field wasn't level. Like they felt like they were paying for tourism infrastructure, and none of the short-term rental guys were pitching in. And I understand that, but I want to make sure, is there a way? I mean, other communities find a way for businesses, short-term rentals to contribute. And maybe rather than protecting, we should be pooling, developing a strategy to pool our resources together and build a way forward. I know Worcester has a tourism tax. Banff has a key tax. There are other ways besides short-term rental fees and licenses to control, for everybody to pitch into the tourism game if that's a decision we want to make. And short-term rentals seems just part of the discussion. Maybe I'm going off track here, but go ahead.
Hey, Ms. Wade, just before you take over, just Councillor Charlotte, you're acting mayor for this month. I just need to use the facilities. Could you take the chair for a moment and go from there? Carry on, Ms. Wade.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Elliott in regards to the Whistler example was designed in a very different way to put what we look at today in our community as short-term rental, and they did a phasing. They did a phase 1 and they did a phase 2. It was it set precedents in a lot of ways on how you could actually put phases on buildings to get heads on beds, because it was a purpose-built resort. It's a very different thing than what we have here in Revelstoke, which has a long history of diversified resource economy that had a ski hill that came here and had heli skiing. So it's a very different, and it had its own act. And the phase covenants that they use have shown historically over time that the intent is for short-term rentals, so that there's limits on the number of times you can rent it out, and that residents can live in it or not live in it. And those have been proven out in the courts, and they have won on those covenants. So I just wanted to say that it's a very different animal than what we are dealing with here in Revelstoke.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Wade. Jackie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering if there was any appetite to put something forward in terms of a motion to put a cap on, and then I would love to include restricting it to the secondary suite if people would say, or if there's somebody who would second that, and then we could discuss it.
Wonderful. So let's maybe start with one at a time. Would you like to make the motion for the cap, and then we can discuss that and then move on to the next topic?
Sure. Yeah, I'll happily make that motion.
Wonderful. And seconder, Michael? You seconding? Yeah. Great. And any further discussion on the policy to cap short-term rentals? Councillor Palmer, and then Councillor Elliott.
Okay, so for clarity, the motion is staff be directed to prepare a policy to cap short-term rentals at 300 units citywide. And I'm wondering if we should, I'm just wondering if it should be clear that that's excluding CD and the resort lands, possibly a friendly amendment on that, just so there's not that
A little
confusion.
bit more clarity. Yeah. Is that all right with you, Jackie? Councillor Ryan, yeah. All right. I don't see any problem with more clarity. We all need that more in our lives. So your worship, we have a motion on the table for directing staff to prepare a policy to cap short-term rentals at 300 units citywide, excluding the CD zones. I think the commercial zones were intended to be included, correct, Ms. Wade?
Correct.
And is that that's
Yes.
what we were
and
talking there, Councillor Palmer and Ryan?
And just a point of clarification, if I may, I think Councillor Palmer also had in RMR. I don't know if you had that in there.
That was the other one. Yes, thank you. So CD zones and RMR.
So those two are excluded then, correct?
That's correct. It's just clarifying because that was excluded anyways in the report, but we're just making sure that the motion has that full clarity.
Perfect.
And then I was about to ask if there's any more discussion.
Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, I just want to throw it out there that we're creating some inequities, and the perceived inequity of you can do it and I can't. And it's just a caution. It's something to be aware of. There might be some pushback.
Well, I think we knew that coming in that we would come up with that, but it's like, let's get something in the bailiwick so that we have people that can definitely enforce this. We have a way to go forward. And then we can actually deal with some of those issues as we go along. Councillor Palmer, you have a comment.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So speaking to the motion, I'll see what the other councillors say regarding the motion itself. I think it's fine because that policy will come back to us. There may end up being, I think there's a good chance there'll be more dialogue on that. It's something that's new that's come up. And I'm probably fine supporting the motion. At the end of the day, though, just for clarity, I may or may not be supportive, depending, as we see what that policy actually looks like and what the surrounding issues. I think the real thing that we really need to do is, try and finalize this before the end of this council term. Something that we're doing with short-term rentals and time's going by, so maybe this is a little bit of a movement that way. Thank you, Mayor Sulz.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry I intruded, Councillor Charlotte. Had you got to the point where all discussion has been finalized on this, we can call the question. You have a first and second on this?
We do, yes. Jackie Ryan made the motion and Councillor Palmer had seconded it.
All right, so any further comment on the motion on the table? I'll then call a question. Councillor Palmer, before I call a question.
I'm fine being second on it, but I thought someone else actually seconded it. No? Okay.
It was Councillor Brooks Hill.
Yeah.
Councillor Brooks Hill. All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting me, guys. Sorry about that.
All right. Good. Okay, we'll go back to the motion on the table. And no further comment. I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Elliott is opposed and all of other council are in favor. Okay, any further council considerations to prepare short-term rental bylaws for first and second reading? Does someone want to make that motion or have a comment? Councillor Ryan, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, before we make that motion, I'd like to make another motion that we restrict short-term rentals to secondary suites, and I'm really hoping that somebody will second it so that we can discuss it.
All right. Is there a seconder for Councillor Ryan's motion? Councillor Charlotte? Further discussion on the motion?
Okay, thank you. I really hope that you guys will consider this as an option because we can always take it off if the public isn't interested. Also, it's telling me that my video is going to turn off because my battery is low. So if I just disappear, that's what happened. Yeah, I hope that we can pass this because I'd love to hear what the public's input is on this topic. I really feel like, you know, in the example, Marisol, that you gave, it's not as if restricting it to the secondary suite wouldn't give you and your wife an option to rent it out. It just means that instead of renting the upstairs, you rent the basement. You're still having supplemental income. And in the, you know, in that example, I know it's just one instance, but like, you know, you live and own that home already. For somebody who's looking at putting, like, who's trying to get into the housing market, I mean, that person will still have to be able to qualify for a mortgage and be able to support that mortgage. So it's not as if, you know, like their expected rental income would be enough for them to qualify based on that alone. So I don't really think that that point's super valid. And then if we put this in place without restricting it to secondary suites, I think like we're lying to ourselves if we don't think the first people that are going to run to those 300 permits are rich people. Like they 100% will. They're going to be like, oh, cool. Like this is available. And, you know, like there's so much construction here in town and like not everybody can schedule a contractor to come in on time, except for people who might, you know, be willing or able to pay for a premium. So I think there's a lot of reasons to restrict it to the secondary suite. And I think if we do this, we're going to set a really good example for other resort communities. And I think if we don't, our businesses are ultimately the ones who are going to suffer. So anyways, that's all I can say.
Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Councillor Ryan, you have a really good point that it is easier to remove restrictions rather than add them. So I'm actually in support of this after all of our conversation, with the understanding that if once we see how the rubber hits the road, as we see the feedback coming back from the community, that we are open to adjusting this as necessary, but this is just taking a cautious first step.
Good. Any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Brookshill. And then Councillor Palmer.
I have to say, Councillor Ron, you've done a good job convincing me. I didn't think I agreed with you. So I will vote to support this. I do think, though, that really, as the mayor said earlier, there should be an area around the resort that allows full house rentals, or, you know, not just secondary suites. There does need to be something that's meeting that demand, and there very much is that demand for a 3 or 4 bedroom accommodation. And to me, around the resort, it'd be a sensible location. So I don't know. I feel like, you know, staff have asked us to simplify things and clarify things, and I'm not sure that we're doing that, but I will vote to support this motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Yeah, I'm uncertain. One of the biggest concerns I have actually with the secondary suites right now is that we're going to be losing affordable housing that's in the market already. It just continues to create affordability issues for those that need to be here for longer term. And I think that's a big part of the question that we're not really answering very well in this whole discussion. And so, not that that's necessarily directly related, other than this whole question about secondary suites. I'm concerned about that, and I would concur that Councillor Ryan is a very good salesperson, and basically on the idea that you know, restrictions could come out later, and I think that's a whole thing on this whole theme when we get to the bylaw itself, is when we get down into those details. What does this really look like? So those are some of the comments. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to vote right at the moment.
All right, thank you. Ms. Wade, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Brooks Hill in regards to the resort fringe, because that is what we're looking at with the OCP housekeeping, is looking at the resort fringe area so that we can actually address the Thomas Brooks area that was to come in when it was annexed in. And we certainly understand that. And also, again, talking about tourist accommodation, which would be like, 4 to 8 bedrooms, roughly speaking, very similar to zoning we did up at Kicking Horse Resort that would allow for accommodation of the larger houses as a tourist accommodation. So definitely you're going to be seeing something shortly.
All right. Thank you for that. Any further comment on the motion on the table? Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Just a quick question to Ms. Wade. This idea around restricting it to the secondary suites, do you have any further comment, or if you've mentioned this before, just reiterating what you might have said in the past? Do you think it's a good idea, or just any comments you might have?
Through your worship to Councillor Palmer, I do have concerns from an affordability point of view. I do think that that the secondary suites do accommodate a certain household income within our community. So it does concern me, but I leave that to council's discretion.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Elliott, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just, I'll just express I'm a bit more laissez-faire. I don't find government is the best way to legitimize or address social issues or housing issues. I think it's a convoluted way is getting in way. We're actually getting in the way of the market, and I think this is it will have a significant influence on various people in our community. People will have houses that they can't put into this system where their neighbor can, and I think it's going to create some tension.
All right, thank you. All right, any further comments on the motion on the table? Okay, I'm not going to support the motion, as I've said earlier, so I'll now call the question. All those in favor? Okay, so we've got those opposed. So we've got Mayor Sulz and Councillor Elliott opposed, all other council in favor, and motion's carried. Thank you. Okay, in the spirit of moving on, we have the second one, prepare the short-term rental bylaws for first and second reading. Someone will put that motion on the table. Councillor Ryan. Okay, seconded by Councillor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on that motion? We do this, it'll get us to third reading or public hearing, and then the community can weigh in. And then we'll see some sort of bylaw come back to council. Is that correct, Ms. Wade, before it goes to public hearing?
Yes, so we would prepare the bylaws now for first and second reading based on our discussion and motions today. And then that would come to council for first and second reading, and then set a public hearing date.
Perfect, good. So any further discussion? Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
No, that's fine, actually. But
okay. Any further comments on the motion that staff prepared the bylaws to come back to council for first and second reading? Okay, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Okay, opposed? Note Councillor Elliott's opposed. All other council are in favor. Motion's carried. Thank you. Is there anything else that we need to do with short-term rentals, Ms. Wade, or can we move on?
Through your worship, I just wanted a point of clarification with Mr. Matuzzi, because we did have a resolution that came out of the February 23rd just to bring back the bylaws for first reading. Is there anything further we have to do administratively, or will this motion today to prepare first and second reading replace that resolution, or do we have to rescind that resolution from the 23rd?
Subject to check by Cindy. I would suggest that you rescind the other motion so it gets it off the books at the same time as you pass this one, then it's gone, right? Oh, there she is.
I agree with you. I think it should be rescinded.
Do we do that now, or do we do that when we put the other one forward?
Do it
Now
now.
would be good.
I'll make
Okay.
that motion.
Okay, seconder for the motion of rescinding that to first reading from the last meeting, Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion? Councillor Charlotte, did you have a question on that too? No? Okay. Any further discussion, Councillor Ryan?
Oh, not about the rescinding this, but I just wanted to thank Ms. Wade. I think this report was really, really well done, and I feel really good about the dialogue that we've had and we're going to have with public.
Okay, Councillor
you.
Palmer, do you have comment on the motion on the table? You're muted.
Just for clarification, so on the table right now, the rescinding motion, the other motion is not yet on the table, is that correct?
The other motion for preparing the bylaw for first and second reading is already been passed.
Okay.
And so what we're doing now is we're just rescinding the first reading motion from last meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'll now call a question. All those in favor of rescinding that last motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, so that's been rescinded. Okay, anything further, Ms. Wade, before we carry on?
No, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Council, for the great discussion. This is why we wanted to have this discussion prior to preparing the bylaws, because we didn't have clear direction, and we really appreciate the discussion on these matters so we can prepare the necessary bylaws. So thank you very much.
Okay, so Council, I scooted out here a few minutes ago. We've been at this for 2 hours. Do you want a 3-minute break before we carry on, or how do you feel?
I'd like a break, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a break and then we'll come back. We're at 5:08, so let's come back at let's say 5:13 or 14, somewhere in there. All right, thank you. Okay, where are we at? Do we have councillors back? Councillors, if you're back in the room, could you turn your cameras on, please? Do we have councillors back in the room and I'm just not seeing them, or?
I think so. I think I see everybody here.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone, so
Oh,
I'm not.
I can see everyone.
Okay, so I'm not seeing anyone. I can see. Okay, let's see. I can't. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, I'm going to leave the meeting and then come back in and see if I can get it. So just hang on. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so let's go on to item 11D, Liquid Waste Management Plan Stage 2 approval. Someone want to give a presentation? Is that where we're at on this, or just go right into the motion? Gonna do presentation? All right.
Mayor, do we need to make a recommendation at this point prior to the presentation?
Okay, you want to do that? We can definitely do that. So do we want to move through the recommendations, councillors? And then we can go through all the presentation. So someone want to make the motion number 1, the alternative option 2018, Councillor Rind? Okay, so you go ahead.
You want me to just read them?
Yes, please.
Can I read all 3? Do I have to do them separately?
We're going to do them separately. Is that correct, Mr. Black? Yep. Ms. Floyd's telling me yes.
All right. That alternative option 2018 be endorsed in advance to the Liquid Waste Management Plan Stage 3.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Charlotte. Any questions or discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Okay.
Just point of clarification. So is there a presentation on that? Because we shouldn't be voting on it until after the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there a presentation, Mr. Black, on that?
Through your worship, at your convenience, I am certainly able to provide a presentation if council is comfortable without that presentation and would like to move forward with voting on it. I would be comfortable with that also. At your pleasure, sir.
Okay, Councillor Palmer, would you like to have that presentation before we vote?
No, that's fine. We can vote on it. I just wasn't sure if there was a presentation, so that's good.
All right, so I'll ask the question again. All in favor of that motion?
I have questions.
Okay.
Sorry, may as well ask them before we vote.
Okay.
Not that I don't think it's going to change much. So for the historical 2008 option, there's mention that if the alternative 2008 option as described below is selected for advancements to stage 3, the Columbia River outfall is no longer needed and council is requested to approve excluding it from further study. Is this a separate motion that you'd like us to make today, Mr. Black?
Through your worship, to Councillor Rind, yes, that is the case, and that is why there's 3 recommendations attached to the council report. The first is the one that, yes.
Oops, sorry.
That's quite all right. It's a rather complicated process that has been delayed over time, and we're at a good point to have further discussion should you so choose to.
We did have another question somewhere in here, but if anybody else has one, it may take me a second to find it.
Okay, council, any further question on the first motion?
Oh yeah, I found it.
Okay, carry on.
In the liquid waste management plan on page 37, they talk about the cost estimates being Class C estimates. Is that just like a high level kind of ballpark figure? It's like not detailed?
Through your worship, to Councillor Rind, I do have on the call today Ms. Elisa Becker and Mr. Dragan Rokic, both from McElhaney, who are the technical consultants on this project, and I would be glad to defer that question to either one of them.
Sure.
I can take that question through your worship to Councillor Rind. Class C estimate it's better than a ballpark, but it's not as detailed as we would move forward with an actual design. So the liquid waste management planning process where we're at, we have an option and we've costed it as best as we can, but it hasn't been detailed design. There aren't actual drawings that have been created that would allow us to have a better, a more detailed cost estimate. That said, because it's at a Class C, we've included quite a few contingencies that are built in that give us a confidence level that the overall budget should be sufficient.
Gotcha. Okay, that sounds great. And then I guess when we're comparing the two options, it seems a bit like a no-brainer, just because one of them is going to be able to service more people and it's half the price. Is there any like downsides of alternative 2018 option?
Through your worship to Councillor Ryan, you're absolutely correct in your assessment of the options. The development of the plan in 2008 and the option to build an outfall to the Columbia River would have only serviced a population of around 17,000, which, as you are aware, with the Rennie study that was completed through the Development Services Department to estimate our population in the next 20 years, we are close to that 17,000 now. And so in hindsight, Council's action of 2012 not to do anything was the proper thing to do. In this option today with better and newer technology, the requirement for the outfall becomes moot and the cost is reduced, and it allows us to service an additional 10,000 population through the OCP process, which is the proper way for us as a community to push forward this technology, the treatment, and to manage the public's money in the best way possible.
And I do have one last question, if that's okay.
Go ahead, sure. And then we'll go to Councillor Palmer. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. The report mentions that there was some public feedback, but it doesn't really outline what any of that feedback was. It kind of just says that 93% of responses were from residents. I'm curious if either of the consultants that are here today could just mention what those were about, like what, generally speaking, were the residents interested in expressing.
If I may, consultant team, and through your worship to Councillor Ryan, I will at this point take control of the presentation and just let you all see what we're doing. I'm assuming you're seeing my screen at this point. Is that correct?
If it's totally black, then yes, we are.
Oh no! It looks like my computer is. Oh, are we there?
Yeah.
We're there.
Thank you for that. I apologize for the technical difficulties that I seem to suffer on a regular basis in doing these things. Here's the presentation, and so we will get right to the public engagement. And so these are some of the options that were, or not some of the options, but some of the things that were done in order to ensure that we had proper public engagement in this. Social media, the Bang the Table, Revelstoke Talks, pre-engagement surveys, specific emails to targeted audience, and presentation to the Environmental Advisory Committee. So we have the committee itself, the Technical and Public Advisory Committee. You can see who is engaged in that. What did we hear? That this community as a whole needs to be engaged in this process. Odor is, though not specifically an item of direct consequence of this stage of the project, but it is something that will be an outcome of updated and newer technology employed when we do build a new wastewater treatment plant. We've engaged the public directly with hard copies of documents at the senior center for those that are not able to gain the access to the documents digitally. Any comments that we have received is in the current report that Council has in front of them, the final Stage 2 report. We've also presented frequently asked questions to the public and to the website. What we hear from the EAC, that the EAC supports the findings of the Stage 2 report, that the EAC also suggests and desires that we work very hard and diligently at reducing infiltration and inflow to reduce the amount of water that goes to the treatment plant so that we can extend the capacity and keep groundwater and rainwater out of the sewer wastewater treatment plant, and that we should also be considering implementing water metering to reduce consumption and therefore reduce the water and fluids flowing to the wastewater treatment plant. Demographics. Here we go. We had a pretty good cross-section. 60% of the population of Revelstoke is generally treated by the sewer or serviced by the sanitary sewer and the treatment plant, and roughly 40% are on septic or pump and haul. And those are a component that we will have to address with the Stage 3 report. What did we hear? We need to be planning for climate change. We need to, again, address the I&I, the reducing stormwater and groundwater from entering the community's sanitary sewer system, minimizing costs and O&M costs for the treatment plant. And again, this alternative option does that in a very high quality way at a significantly reduced cost from the previous efforts that have been placed in front of council. Getting the rest of the community onto the sewer, and I think many of the council has received concerns that the CSRD was no longer accepting septage, and so I think that also lends us to believe that it's a good opportunity to further extend our sanitary sewers to service those areas that are not currently on our sewer system. We need to consider reducing and reusing the treated water, i.e. potentially for irrigation, maybe for heating the building at the wastewater treatment plant. Meeting the federal and provincial regulations, reducing odors, and protecting the rivers. We also sent this document to the BC, the province, environmental, and their technical specialists were very pleased with the direction this document took. And it's clean, it makes sense. It's a Lego process where we can build on existing technologies at the lagoons, add pieces as we need to continue to build and expand the wastewater treatment plant to build a system that will service the community for many, many, many years. And as the bottom statement there, the draft report provides a good roadmap and ideas for implementation of the programs. So I think that's very complimentary of the work that our consultants have done. I don't believe that this is a standard response in regards to many of these Stage 2 reports for liquid waste management plans that have been completed in other parts of the province. So here we are. This is the summary recommendation that is in the report. And that really is the end of the presentation. The next stage is to further define, refine, and cost the preferred option should council decide to move forward today with accepting of the Stage 2 report. We would then be looking to develop project funding, a schedule for implementation, and then this goes to council for approval, back to you, and it does go to the province. And so once we adopt Stage 3, that is our plan for the long term. If future councils decide that that's not where we want to go, then we start the whole process over again. We'll see what happens with that. And so that is my presentation today.
All right, thanks, Mr. Black. Councillor Ryan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so that's great. I'm curious, I know water metering isn't in our super near future, but it was interesting that it got mentioned in some of the public feedback. Does the option that does the 2018 option allow for the opportunity to down the road do water metering, or is that like a totally different thing?
I can defer this one to Ms. Becker, generally speaking, it's not part of how we treat wastewater, but it is something that from the water side, as a community, we need to also be concerned about our intakes and the amount of water that we have for build out to make sure that we do have enough water for the future public to be here. And again, with climate change, these are all actions that make sense. I don't know that it will be part of the stage 3 report. I'll leave that to Ms. Becker to answer.
Okay, Ms. Becker, carry on, please.
Councillor Ryan, through your worship, great question. We did have that feedback about water metering, and that is important. Stage 3, the focus of it, and really all of the liquid waste management plan is in the name. It's liquid waste. That said, as we've received public feedback for a number of items, we don't want to lose track of those. So we're going to use stage 3 to do what the province says we need to do, which is further refine, as you can see on the slide there, further refine one option to move forward with. At the same time, we are going to outline important plans, policies, and things for council to be working on that will help the overall situation with the liquid waste. And so one of those will be a recommendation to, we'll have some recommendations regarding water metering, although it's not necessarily part of the liquid waste management plan. We don't want to lose that. There'll also be some recommendations in there regarding fats, oils, and grease, if you remember the fog. And some other items like that we want to make sure get moved forward. Infiltration and inflow, I&I, that's one that the ministry themselves identified as important to not lose sight of. So stage 3 will have some recommendations around that, but stage 3 is not to implement those. It's just to identify those are important for liquid waste and then move those forward into future policies.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I guess I don't know the details of how a liquid waste management plan works, but I guess it would, if it's something that we're hoping to have until 2041, it would just be a shame if there wasn't any way to like work that in, but it sounds like there are different things and then your suggestions will help us get prepared for it. So that's great. Thanks very much.
Any further comments on number 1, the alternative option? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Your Worship. Funding program. I know having this plan complete gets us to the provincial level where we can actually go after funding. And I think, Stephen, you've mentioned that we're in the running for some grant money, possibly if this thing moves forward. Is that right? Maybe that's something we could share. If maybe we can't. I don't know.
Through Your Worship to Councillor Elliott. We have not received any news regarding grants at this point in time. Key, in my opinion, to ensuring that we maximize our opportunities to receive grants is to have a liquid waste management plan adopted by council and approved by the province, because it does give us the roadmap and it does give the province the comfort that we are going to do what we say we are going to do. And so that is why it's very important for us to complete this process, and that is why we as staff are trying to address your council priorities, and this is one of the significant priorities that we need to get out of the way this year. In addition to the future funding, Councillor Elliott, once we know what the costs of these items are and what the solutions are to I&I, that will help us then refine our budgets and make sure that we have the proper mechanisms to tax people for the utility. And again, it feeds the DCCs so that the future residents and future visitors can contribute to the solution and not allow the existing residents and shadow population to be burdened with expansion of a facility that is really not needed, because we can manage what we have with the existing population. As our visitor base grows, this becomes the issue as our current facility is nearing capacity. So long-winded way of saying we don't have a grant. We're hopeful for a grant. The liquid waste management plan adoption is key, in my opinion, to maximizing those opportunities for future grant programs.
Good, thank you. Councillor Palmer, you had your hand up. Do you still have a question?
Just a couple comments. Yeah, I think it's really important just on grants that this gives us the opportunity to qualify for grants, and I'm sure we'll be aggressively pursuing any that are available for us once we have this plan in place. So I think it's just really prudent. I do congratulate the team on this. And Dragon, I know you had a big part of that on the technology. I was quite pleasantly surprised at the cost-effective approach that you've taken. There is a couple concerns. It's not all. I think further to Councillor Ryan's questions about any downsides, and one of them is we're not moving the lagoons to another location away from South Side, and that's probably one of the biggest concerns. So we still need to continue to mitigate any odor issues in that area. This should help, and so I think that's important. I do have a question regarding and I know I brought this up at the committee level on the Class C estimates. I think since the committee, that was a couple of months ago, I think now. I think prices have skyrocketed since then. I think I asked this question before, but I'm almost wondering if you had another adjustment in the last couple months here.
At least,
yeah. If I can answer.
Okay.
Yeah, as you know, the construction climate today is such that it is very, very difficult to do cost estimates today. So we will produce another refined Class C cost estimate during stage 3 to address everything what was going on in the construction industry over the past couple of months. So that's only we can say. And again, that cost estimate will be based on the conceptual design, but will be refined with respect to stage 2.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz.
Great, thank you. So, Mr. Black, can I get you to stop sharing your screen, if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll have we can move on with the recommendations here. Okay.
Am I off? Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. So we have first and second on motion number 1. Is that correct, Cindy? Am I? We did that. I believe we did. So let's, okay, let's call the question unless there's any more questions on number 1 about the alternative option 2018 being endorsed and advanced. Seeing no further comments, I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 2, but the Columbia River. Someone want to put that motion on the table, please? Councillor Palmer.
So I'm going to do just a slight adjustment, and if there's any comments before we get a second, that's fine. So that funding, the finding to exclude the Columbia River outfall option from future studies be supported for the stage 3 study. I just don't want this to be something that's restricting after. So for the liquid waste management plan stage 3.
Okay. Seconder for the motion. Okay, Councillor Brooks Hill. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Charlotte.
So just to clarify, Councillor Palmer read the motion as is in the agenda package, or was the wording changed?
The wording was changed. He said to implement this for plan stage 3. Is that correct, Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so that the finding to exclude the Columbia River outfall option from future studies be supported for the liquid waste management plan stage 3. All I'm doing is just I just don't like it's a technicality, but it's just not a blanket for forever in the future kind of thing, because it might come up later. It's a minor thing. It's not that important. And if the consultants have any comments, if there's any concern about that, I could take it off.
I see no concerns. Any further questions on the motion as amended?
I'll make a comment to the motion, or if we're okay with the motion as it is.
And I see that the consultants say, yeah, it's okay.
And if it has it been seconded? Then I'll just speak to the motion.
It's been seconded.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor Sulz. So I think it's just a housekeeping item, really, because it's the liquid waste management plan. As we're advancing, this becomes a moot point, and I think it's just basically a housekeeping item motion.
Okay. Councillor Elliott, you have a comment?
No, no.
Okay. If you want to lower your hand, if you don't mind, Councillor. Okay, seeing no further comments or questions on the motion, as Councillor Palmer has put forward, all those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 3. Someone want to put that on the table, please? Councillor Charlotte?
That the liquid waste management plan stage 2 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Motion is adopted. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you to our consultants, to Mr. Black. Appreciate that. We'll move forward with the liquid waste management plan. Thank you for all of your work. Appreciate that. All right, we're going to move on to item 11E, Camozzi Road, Nichol Road cost sharing agreement. Someone want to put that motion on the table, and then we can have a discussion. Councillor Brooks-Hill.
That the mayor and CAO be authorized to enter into a cost sharing agreement with Revelstoke Mountain Resort Limited General Partnership 0929 468 BC Limited in the city of Revelstoke for the construction of the Nichol Road Camozzi roundabout.
Okay, is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Elliott, any discussion on the motion? All right, Councillor Brooks-Hill.
My only, as a comment, I think this is a good project. My only question is, maybe I missed it, but if there's cost overruns, would they be just shared in the same proportion, or how would that work if it goes over budget?
Mr. Black?
Through your worship, the answer to this is very clear in the cost sharing agreement, and it is also identified in the terms that are there. The answer is that we are fixed at our impact, both to the total cost. So if there are cost overruns, our cost does not increase. However, if the cost of the project turn out to be less than the budgeted amount, which is approximately $1.9 million, if it turns out to be less, that we pay a flat 10% out of that. So our maximum is fixed. If the cost of the project is less, we pay less. And in the worst case scenario that the costs do increase, RMR is the beneficiary of those additional costs. And neither Mackenzie Village, the numbered company, nor the city will be responsible for additional costs.
All right. Thank you. Is that clear, Councillor Brooks-Hill?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Ryan. Okay, you didn't hear what Councillor or Mr. Black had said?
Through your worship, and I'm sorry for the amount of information that was provided as backup material to this. This was an exceptionally fun project for me personally to have presented the October report where we talked about, road sections and bike paths up Nichol Road, and then the traffic studies that we did and the cost allocations, and then the agreements and the term sheets. And so I apologize for the amount of information, but I think we have done our due diligence, and we've also addressed many of the issues that will come out of the future transportation master planning work, because we now have addressed basically South Revelstoke's major infrastructure, and we have mechanisms to finance it and cost sharing agreements as reference points to push these projects forward in the future. So I'm sorry to diverge in that, but.
So, Councillor Brookshill, just to clarify, are you your understanding of what the costs are and how they're going to be disseminated?
Yeah, no, I understood Mr. Black's explanation. I was apologizing for missing it in the report.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for that. Councillor Ryan, do you have your hand up?
I do. I just want to make sure I'm understanding the breakdown of costs. So of the 190 that the city is going to put into this, 76,000 of that 190 is work that is going to be spent that we basically have to spend otherwise rehabilitating Nichol Road. Is that correct?
Correct. And that was the findings out of the 2020 pavement management plan, which was presented to you in December, I believe. And so that section of Nichol Road is falling apart, and it was scheduled for rehabilitation this year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Any further comments on the motion on the table? All right. I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Black. Thank you, Council. Going to go on to item 11F, Parks, Rec and Culture Art Alleries Phase 3. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Councillor Ryan?
Sure, that the art gallery project located at 111 Victoria Road West, 111 First Street West, and 200 Mackenzie Avenue be approved, subject to the building owners satisfying all applicable city permitting requirements.
Okay, seconder for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Any questions on the motion? Ms. Donato is here. If you have any questions of her, she'd be willing to answer them. All right, this is a great project. It's nice to have these alleys with this art. Definitely attracts people. It's nice to see. I can come out of the back of my building and see people standing, look at the art on the dental building. So it's interesting to see people actually walk up and down the alleys looking at it. So it's a great project. Seeing no further questions, I will ask the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Donato. Appreciate your work. It's been carried. All right, we're going to move on to item 12A, informal petition correspondence with 4th Street. So I know that we've received this. We've seen many emails come in. I've received many emails about this. Mr. Black and I have spoken about this. Any comments from council? I know Mr. Black is working through master transportation plan and talking about safety in the south side area along 4th Street. And as we get busier, then of course safety becomes even more prevalent. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot lately because my husband's currently working as a driver for one of the companies involved in all this construction going on. And there's a lot of construction going on this summer, as I think we will expect for the next few building seasons. And with only one road going through that central part of town, between our gravel pits on the one end of city and the development going on up near the resort, this is not a surprise. So as much as I appreciate that our transportation master plan will take care of the long-term vision of how the safety will happen, I also appreciate the desire to have something in the meantime. So I'm looking forward to and curious to hear back from Mr. Black and what plans he can come up with.
Great. We're going to ask him that momentarily. Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up.
I'll wait for my comments, listen to Mr. Black, what he has in plans. Yeah.
Mr. Black, are you still there with us?
I am, Your Worship, and to Council, this we are very aware of the issue here on 4th Street, and yes, we are looking at opportunities here to address some of the concerns. As much as I would like to be able to just go, yes, we're going to go do something right away, I'm uncomfortable in pursuing a solution in that manner. I do have some money set aside for a pilot project for traffic safety, and in light of that, I've directed a consultant to look at 4th Street, help us define some options that we can implement soonest, such as temporary curb outs so that we narrow the roads and allow pedestrians to have a better view of the traffic coming either way, additional crosswalks and signage, anything that we can do to add traffic calming in the area. And so I expect to come back to council in the next few meetings with some recommendations for your consideration that we can bring forward and put onto the ground as soon as possible to help address these concerns. And then again, in the long term, I'm sorry, Mayor, in the long term, then we will also have to consider our road sections, the width of the road, parking, pedestrian access, in addition to the future BC housing project at the just to the north of Southside Market, which is also forthcoming. So there's lots of changes coming, and we want to do this once. We don't want to do it piecemeal. And so that's my goal to you. And I will return in the next few meetings with some recommendations for your consideration.
Great, thank you. Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. I just would like to formalize this with a motion that the safety concerns on 4th Street, specifically between and including the intersections of Downey Street and the Ill-Silhouette Bridge, long-term issues be referred to the Master Transportation Plan, and the short-term concerns be referred to the Director of Engineering for recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Rind. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to communications, CED, Economic Development Commission meeting minutes. Any comments on those? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one question on the transportation plan overall. Do we have a date when that might be completed?
Mr. Black?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Elliott, we are still let me start over. We have engaged a consultant, and our timeline is to be done sometime near the end of October, as previously outlined to you when we awarded the contract. So we're still online. We expect to go out to the public with some visioning statement information right away, and we're starting to develop a traffic model right now for the community as a whole, and we are looking at presenting various components of the transportation master plan to the community in the next month or so also. So it is underway. We're building the tools and the presentation pieces for the community to evaluate and consider for the future.
Well, that's good. That's great, Stephen. Just one more question. I know we, in previous discussions at council, we've talked about this rainbow crosswalk. I wonder if this is an opportunity to implement all. I know we talked downtown, but there's an opportunity to do one along this main thoroughfare. I wonder if that's being considered.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Elliott, that crosswalk is actually going to be implemented here in the next few weeks, as described to council. I believe it was last fall at the location of Mackenzie and 3rd. unless council chooses to direct staff to consider delaying that implementation and put it someplace on 4th Street when we do have a plan that will come back to council.
Any further comments? Okay, we're going to move on. I think we'll carry on with the plan for the Rainbow Crosswalk as we'd already discussed so that we get that done. Okay, Community Economic Development Commission meeting minutes. Any comments? They're in front of you. Seeing none, I'm going to move on to Parks, Rec and Culture Public Art Committee meeting minutes for the 9th of March. Seeing none, moving on to the Advisory Planning Commission meeting minutes for May 18th. Okay, seeing none. Cindy, do we have any questions from the press?
We haven't received anything from the press.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, Council, I'd like to go in camera pursuant to section 90.1 A and E of the Community Charter. Moved by Councillor Ryan, seconded by Councillor Charlotte. All in favor? Motion's carried. We're going to take a 5-minute break and we're going to come back to in camera. Thank you, Council. Thank you to our consultants and our staff.